Hi, I hope you can hear me. We are about to start this expert session on collecting data, reading minds. Thank you very much, Richard. Um, we have a packed program today, very interesting program, lots of different speakers that are keen on sharing their insights into neurotechnology with you, but also discussing and hearing all kinds of different perspectives. Yes, this session will be recorded, so people can watch it afterwards as well. There's people watching it online via live stream, and I will be taking pictures, which I hope you're all okay with. I think there was a form when you signed up to agree. So, without further ado, I'll present to you Richard from Wesel. Thank you.
Thanks, Andra. I would like to welcome you all here at the Donders Institute. An event organized by Neurotech EU and the Rathenau Institute, and a lot of people from the Donders Institute that are involved in this organization. So I'm Richard van Wesel. I'm project coordinator of Neurotech EU. That's a European alliance, a European university that we are setting up with the Radboud University as a coordinator on neurotechnology. Well, today we are here for what is called an expert session on neurotechnology and the impact on society. That started with our connections with the Rathenau Institute that just published a report on this. And we thought it would be nice to discuss that here in this setting and also show you more about what the type of research that we are doing. We are lucky that we also have some other experts from Europe and from UNESCO that will tell more. We have a rather tight schedule with a lot of presentations, so that's very nice. So I will keep it short. Just this word expert, I think everyone is an expert here today because we are really talking about how we as society should deal or what we think about neurotechnology, where it's heading to. So that is something that everybody is involved, of course, our whole society. So everybody is an expert here. So we also have in this program time for discussions and questions. Certainly at the last end, at the panel discussion, everybody can also be involved in that panel discussion. But let's first start with the presentation of Luc X from the Rathenau Institute, presenting the work that they did and the report that just came out, and please for you the word.
Thank you, Richard. Richard, I should say. The clicker is this one, right? Okay, perfect. So my name is Luc and I work at the Rathenau Institute. And it's interesting to be back here because I think my journey in neurotechnology started exactly in this room. I think about 1 year ago. There was also a conference or an event around neurotechnology, and I was visiting this because I knew I had to write a report about neurotechnology. So really good to be back here. Today I will present, I think, the basics of neurotechnology. I will talk for around 20 minutes or so, I think, and in 20 minutes from now you have a better understanding of the basics of neurotechnology. You have a feeling of what people are talking about when they talk about neurotechnology, and you have a feeling of what can be expected in short term and in long term, and maybe never. So this is my promises for the next 20 minutes. There might be some question at the end. It depends on if I finish early. But just by a show of hands, how many of you would would like it to communicate with their surroundings, with their environment, solely from their thinking? Just so only by thinking, communicate with their surroundings, just by a show of hands. A little bit higher, don't hesitate. Who is sure never want to do this? More or less. Never? If it's safe? Maybe, okay. So let's say half and half hasn't decided yet. Who would like to get rid of their phone, but instead have a brain implant with the same functions? Just get rid of your phone, and you can do the same things. Raise your hands, a little bit higher. Do we have social media on there? And anything you like, applications. It's like so a little bit less than half. Okay. Who is wearing wearable technology? Wearables meaning Fitbits, meaning smartwatches. A little bit like half or something, maybe less, maybe 20%. Okay, interesting. Remind me of returning to these questions at the end of this presentation and see if you change your mind or not. So let's talk about neurotechnology. The presentation is called Collecting Data, Reading Thoughts, question mark, because it's all about the collection of the data. I have the honor of presenting here. Of course, I never work on my own. I work with all these expertise right here, Sophie, Rosanne, Bo, and Freek. Freek, I think, is joining later. Rosanne is here in the room, so if you have any questions, please also address it to them. But I think, personally, that neurotechnology is quite impressive. And it speaks to the imagination. Because we might be able to communicate with our surroundings solely from our thought. And I think that's quite impressive. And we might be able to influence our mental states with it. During our research, we came across many examples of research projects I found personally very impressive. So I could show you many, but I chose this one to start with. What you see here is relative recent research. Who's familiar with this picture? Some of you? Not all? Okay. We see a participant here going in an fMRI scanner. And the fMRI scanner is a sensing mechanism which senses brain activities. And inside the scanner, an audio file is played. The scanner is attached to an AI system. And the AI system is trained to try to understand where the participant is listening to, but only by looking at the brain activity. And here in the text, you see the result. In the middle, you see the actual audio written out. And on the far, for you guys, right, you see the results that the AI system came up with. And the researchers concluded that in 50%, the AI system was able to either have the perfect match the words or have similar words and made sentences out of this. Now, I think for me, new in this field, and definitely for everyone outside of this building, this is very impressive. I'll return to this example now and then during this presentation, but this is a good start, I think. So a little bit more about who am I and who are we. I work for the Rathenau Institute, and we do research and organize debate around the impact of science, technology, and innovation in our life. We write on many different subjects, so not only on neurotechnology, but also, of course, also about different topics. For example, immersive technologies. Think about virtual reality and augmented reality. We write about generative AI, but also about really different DNA gene editing topics or the state of science in the Netherlands at the moment. So expect to find this on our website. It's good to say that I'm not a brain expert. I don't work in neuroscience. At the Rathenau Institute, we combine different types of expertise to look at new technologies and see what might be expected in short term and long term. So I'm not an expert, but we combine all kinds of teams. Usually, the Rathenau chooses themselves what to write about, but sometimes we are asked by, for example, in this case, the Ministry of Internal Affairs, to answer a question. And this was the case with neurotechnology. The Ministry of Internal Affairs asked us, can you write something about neurotechnology beyond the medical sector? So that's our scope. I'll get more into this later on. But here's our report. We published it very recently. At the end of this presentation, there's a QR code, and you can download it, or you can go to our website and read it in Dutch. And I wrote it, as I said, with several others. So here are the names of the authors. But the Rathenau scan, we call it, and it's one of several scans about upcoming technologies. And in the Rathenau scan, it's a short publication published in a short time period, because we do this at the request of the ministry, so they can have a better understanding of what's coming at us. Previous subjects were immersive technology, quantum computing, and the other one is generative AI, yes. What we do for this report is that we do desk research, of course. We look a lot at review research, so research that combines all kinds of literature in the academic field. We look at grey literature, journalism, reports from institutes like us and in foreign countries. And we ask experts in the field. This is why when we got in touch, because we survey experts and then we have an expert session and continue this conversation. We also have a survey among politicians, policymakers, not politicians, but policymakers working at ministries. And this combined is the foundation of this report. So let's dive into neurotechnology now. So why now? Why do we say as Rathenau Institute that neurotechnology is an upcoming technology? Because 100 years ago, EEG systems were able to measure neuroactivities in someone's brain. And I think around 37 years ago, researchers were able to connect a robot with an EEG system with someone's mind, and they were able to let the robot move or stop just solely by thinking, using EEG systems. So it's not kind of new technology. But we still speak about an upcoming technology because of three things. First thing you see on this picture right here, the headsets have innovated. And this specifically has to do with the technological layer of this of neurotechnology. The measuring systems have become better at measuring brain activities with a dry contact. Before, we had to use all kind of gels, put it on our head, and then touch the measuring systems on our head, and then we could read brain signals. Nowadays, in the shops, or you can order headsets where you don't have to put gel anymore on your head. And this makes it very attractive for consumers, because you don't have to wear gel, you can just put on a headset and take it off. Second innovation we think is upcoming, and this is the AI systems. I gave this example before. AI systems are better at understanding large sets of data. In the past 10 years it happened. And they're also better at saying what is noise and what is actual brain data. And then the third innovation, or the second innovation also from AI system, is on the application side. AI systems are able to produce text or images or sounds based on this data they analyze. And that means that users can actually read it. And users can actually look at it. Instead that an expert is looking at some kind of graph, it becomes more available for non-experts to work with an AI system, put a measurement system on their head, and start working with neurotechnology. And this combination of innovation, I think, makes the third process. And this is that we see that there's more and more interest from smaller and larger companies to do research and development, to develop neurotechnology outside of the health domain. So you can think about education, think about private use, think about health for your privacy self, think about marketing. All these domains have been researched and developed, and there are headsets available for application outside of this health sector. So let's zoom out a bit. What are people talking when they talk about neurotechnology? This is usually divided within neurotechnology. On the left, we see invasive neurotechnology. That's for you also on the left, yeah. And on the right, non-invasive neurotechnology. So for example, on the top left, there you see invasive neurotechnology, and with invasive I mean that there's a surgery needed for the measuring system to start measuring. So it's either under your skin, under your skull, even on the brain. Those are all invasive techniques. And the non-invasive techniques on the other side, they all have pros and cons. But with the non-invasive I mean headsets you can just put on without having surgery. They all have different types of measurements, but they also, some are very useful to do at home, and some you have to step on your bike or go in a car and lie down in. For example, the fMRI scanner I've talked to you about. I think the least invasive is the kind of headband. And this is, of course, a marketing picture. But what they communicate is that it's so easy to put on and off and usable already. For example, in this case, for meditation. To learn to meditate. I'll get back on this a bit in the end of the presentation. And then we have the top layer and the down layer. The top layer is visual. Those are two goals of neurotechnology. One goal is visualizing what is going on inside the brain of someone, and the other goal is modulating. Can we influence mental states with neurotechnology? A great example here is I came across recently. This 666 euro headset is promising that you'll have a better sleep if you wear this before you go to sleep. So it's modulating, it says, your sleep process. But now let's dive into a bit more and see what underlying processes are always there when we think about neurotechnology. So the most important thing is the mental state. That's a human being, and the human being is thinking about something. And there are many mental states you can think about, but always neurotechnology is after finding out what is going on in these mental states, and then finding applications for it. But what you should think about, I mentioned already a few, but for example, think about concentration. Neurotechnology is used to find out if people in the back of the room are as concentrated as people in the front of the room. And alertness. If you're driving in a car, you can have a headset on and the measuring system will tell you if you're still alert or maybe fall asleep. Now those are easy ones, but it gets more tricky. For example, emotions. We see headsets working with fear, headsets trying to find out if you're happy. And then even more complex, our stream of thought. I think everyone experienced having a stream of thought, but there's also discussing, there's a discussion around neurotechnology focusing on these streams of thoughts. So this is, I think, the broadest perspective you can have of what you can think about when I say mental states and what neurotechnology is after. Now let's move on to the right. There are always measuring systems that have to measure physiological processes in your brain. It can be many different physiological processes. For example, neurons firing electricity, which is then seen by a measuring system, or oxygen level in your blood, all types of things you can measure. But these measurement systems, they measure these brain activities, and they translate this into digital data. And this is where neurodata gets in. And that's important because neurodata is a new type of data. Just remind this for the end of the presentation. With neurodata, you're able to analyze this with a computer. For example, with an AI system, or with just a person, an expert, or a combination of an AI system and an expert. And the analysis always have insights, and with the insights, you can work in many ways in applications. So always, when you think about neurotechnology, I think you can go back to the scheme and see where are we in the neurotechnology system. What different process are we talking about? So this slide has a lot of information, but it gives a really nice overview of all the things we write about in our report. On the green part, you see applications, and we write about applications in specific domains. And on the other side, we write about public values. Because we think that once we write about new technologies, we think that they should build on these public values and not undermine them. This is why they get a special part of the report, and that's how we look at neurotechnology. And we write about opportunities and risks from these technologies. So let's pick out some applications I mentioned. We write about applications when they are either being theorized on by experts in the academic field. They are tested in the laboratory, like down here or somewhere else, or they've been tested outside of the laboratory, or they are already in use. In this scheme, in this matrix, we don't divide between them, but in the text you will see which one are what state. But let's take, for example, administration of justice. The main question here that is theorized around is that is it possible to see if someone recognizes a murder weapon if we look at their brain signals. This could be very meaningful, of course, in court, because if someone recognizes a murder weapon, you have a new fact you can work with in an offense or defense. But also this immediately raises ethical questions. What should we think about false positives? What should we think about false negatives? But also, what should we think about freedom of thought for people who don't want to cooperate in court, because we have the right to not cooperate? Is it still possible if this can be detected from neurosignals? So that's theorized around. Let's move to education, for example. Now, there was recently a very big project in the Netherlands where students all were measuring systems, and the tutor was having a lecture and looked at how the concentration went in the classroom and see what different learning styles did with the concentration level in the back and in the front. And he then thinks that it's very useful to get feedback immediately on a screen right here and see how is the concentration level in my class and should I change teaching style. So that's already tested outside of a laboratory. And I think the third example is neuromarketing. In neuromarketing, fMRI scanners are already being used all of the time. So what the marketeers here try to do is to find out what is the best marketing strategy. And to find out this, they put people inside an fMRI scanner and see how their brain reacts. So this is already in use in society. There's some skepticism about the usability of this, but they use it and they pitch it like this to their to people who want to have the best marketing strategy. But now let's move over to the public value side. And let's talk about, for example, about health and well-being. As I said before, most of the neurotechnology is marketed in a way that it says you can improve your health and your well-being. At least most of the marketing we came across in our research. This makes opportunities, for example, for work, for your mental health, or physical health at home, or mental health at home. Recently, for example, I was at the conference South by Southwest. Are you familiar? South by Southwest in Austin, which is partly a technology conference. I presented the exact same presentation. And I tried out a headset. So I was at a stand, put it on my head, and there was a screen in front of me. And the person from the stand said, focus on the screen. There was some kind of screensaver in front of me, and said, if you focus enough, your brain gets into in a relaxing state, and that's good for your health. And if you lose focus, then the system will know it immediately. And the feedback loop was as followed. They had speakers on my shoulders. The speakers played music when I was relaxed, and when I was distracted, the music kind of were blurry or became a bit weird sounds, and I had to focus again. And there was a score of my focus level. I was really bad at it though. And someone had a high score, and he said, yeah, he's probably someone who's really good in meditating or something. So this is the product he was trying to sell me. And I think most of the products we come across are sold in this kind of way. So this could mean opportunities for your well-being. But let's go to privacy. Because I think immediately when you tell someone that you work on neurotechnology and you say, you tell them I am after the mental states in your head, they think about privacy. And I think it's good to look at, again, the concepts I told you about, which you can understand if I talk about mental states. Here are some examples. So on the top level are the easy ones, I think, and the more down you go, the more complex they get. At least what we did is in our research is that we had a survey, and we surveyed experts in the Netherlands working in the field of neurotechnology and asked them, what do you expect from neurotechnology? Is it possible to detect something about these mental states in short and long term? And this is, I think, kind of what they came up with. This may be long term, maybe never, and this maybe is already being done. So concentration I told you about already. Probably possible. You say something about someone's concentration mental state. Alertness also. And movement we see a lot. We see a lot of, for example, brain implants where people who are locked in think about moving their cursor or something, or moving a cursor in a game of Pong, and then with their mental states are able to move this cursor. But then it gets more complex. Fears, dreams, and memories. There's research which shows that it's possible to say something about these mental states with neurotechnology. And now it gets interesting, thought streams of thoughts. Either conscious or unconscious. And I think if you look at international debate about this subject, usually people are thinking about this long-term, super complex part of the mental states that neurotechnology might be after, and might be able to say something about in the future, long-term or I don't have to, I cannot tell like when, but long term. Internationally, there's already a discussion to see if we still have freedom of thought, if these more complex mental states are unlocked by neurotechnology devices, and who is able to get then to see the neurodata where it is derived from. This is why I pointed out that neurodata, a new type of data, is interesting to look at. There's also arguments among experts if we can ever go as far as streams of thoughts. The arguments go something like this: our mental states are can never be fully reduced to only neural activities on itself, because all our thoughts are influenced by our surroundings. For example, my hands, or the room here, or if I look at someone, or if I think about a previous thought. So it's way more complex than only looking at neural activity. But I think now already in the discussion people are saying, okay, but what if, and what should we do then? And I think at Rathenau Institute we advise to have this discussion right now, even when it's maybe 10 years, 20 years, 30 years from now, to see, okay, how is, for example, our human rights? How are they compared to the possibility of someone reading all these complex thoughts? But I think also what you can learn in looking at the future is that you should immediately think about the reality we live in right now. Because if we have fears or dreams about this future, we can also look at the current state and the current technologies. And this is what our view of Rathenau Institute is at neurotechnology. We see this as a new part of technologies we already use. Because this technology will be combined with the technologies we already wear. This is why I asked you, who's wearing a wearable? Who would like to have a brain implant? Because in a way, I think current technology is already after all these mental states. Think, for example, about tracking cookies. Tracking cookies follow users around the web. They measure time spent on web pages, and they try to see where you're concentrated on. They try to see what you dream of, what you want to buy, where you want to fly, what you want to see next. So a lot of current technology is already trying to understand a lot of our mental states. And I think that another current technology you can look at is, for example, personalization by algorithms. A lot of them is used right now because the algorithms that follow you looking at videos try to predict what to send you next, what to feed you next. And they also try to understand what you're concentrated on, but also what you're thinking about and what you might want to see next. So I think that what we can learn from looking at the future in neurotechnology is that we can also look at the current state and the current technologies at this time. But I'm in a room of experts, Richard said. Everyone here is an expert. So let's see what you think for yourself. How far is neurotechnology at this moment going? And I'm really looking forward at Richard's talk about state-of-the-art neurotechnology. I'm very curious on where the Donders Institute is at this moment. But let's say that this is state-of-the-art right now. And let's say this is the most advanced part we are at this moment with neurotechnology. And see, okay, so what is measured here? What kind of mental states are seen and what not? And it helps to give a little bit more context about what is actually going on here. Because the person is listening to audio, but if the person doesn't cooperate, then the AI system didn't, of course it has output, but not usable. If, for example, the participant started thinking about a string of animals or something, there was only noise. The participant had to be for at least 12 hours inside the fMRI scanner for the AI system to be trained upon. And the AI system didn't work for other participants working in the same study because we all have different type of brain signals. So this, I think, makes you a little bit more, gets you a bit more of the feeling of the borders that these technologies can go. And is there information about mental states? To a certain extent, there's information about mental states, what people are listening to. But this is the same thing as what people are thinking about. Now, I leave this question for you, like how far is this? And I definitely want to see if we today can reach a point that we can see, okay, how far can we get? And maybe there's a theoretical border. But I think this is a good starting point to think about. This was my presentation. Here's a QR code. You can download our report from. Is there someone in the room who already have read the reports? Maybe some of you, yeah, okay, no. This is the English version. I'll wait for some people to make the actual picture. If you have any question or any comment, we are really happy to hear it. If you have any comment on anything about the reports, email me. Don't hesitate. It's okay. If you think it sucks, please email me. If you think it's nice, also email me. But thank you. Maybe there are questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Luc, for this interesting talk. So maybe while we are setting up, because we are in a hybrid situation, that's always can take some time to get everything going. So maybe, Andra, you can already arrange that. We can have questions for Luc. So I would really like to urge you to read the report, but also, I think more importantly, the message that to take part in this discussion. Also, not only the scientists, but everyone, I think, in society. Okay. So maybe there is a question, maybe while you are setting up, yeah. Andra?
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you speak very loudly here in this room? Because without microphone, it's... Yeah.
Thank you for a nice presentation. I also read your report. I'm a policy from the RVM, and we work on the medical technology department. And what we saw in your report is that you mainly focus on these ethical aspects. You say you do not take medical applications into account, but of course, neurotechnology is also applied outside of medical applications, but at the same time can have effects on public health. So have you considered that? Have you considered to take that into account?
Yeah, so we write about I think the public value of mental health, and there we dive into this. Oh yeah. So yeah, I think we address this in the report slightly or shortly when we talk about mental health and maybe the opportunities for mental health. But we didn't look at the medical sector because the regulation there might be very, very different than the commercial sector. So this is the reason why we divided. Apply to the medical sector could also apply to this kind of technology. I think definitely, yeah, that's definitely a good point. And I think in chapter 4 we dive into the neuro data, which could be similar kind of data from which is maybe more protected in the medical sector than outside of the medical sector. So that's definitely a discussion to have right now because the data is already being harvested, and we don't know what the future will bring with interpreting this data. But I think here you see, I think the diversion of these two domains in specifically the data and what type of data do we think it is. Maybe that's as an answer to your question.
So I would suggest we will have more time for questions later, if that's okay, so that we can keep a little bit to the program schedule. So I'm looking forward to the next talk of Frederik Destrebeck from the European Brain Council, who also surveyed the opinion of Europeans on neurotechnology. So Frederik, for you the word. Let's see if it works. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much for the invitation to join you this afternoon. Apologies that I cannot be there in person. As mentioned, my name is Frederik Destrebeck. I'm the Executive Director of the European Brain Council, and I'm happy to present on behalf of the organization about our work related to the emergence of new technologies in the brain space. So I'll be covering examples of projects that we have been busy with, but also have a particular deep dive on a project called Brain Teaser, then talk about the European Charter on the responsible development of neurotech, and have a concluding word on an event that we organize now on an annual basis to discuss this type of issues, which are the Brain Innovation Days. Basically, and before I hop into all of these considerations, I believe it's important to remind the reason why we have started all this work and our activities as an advocacy organization in Brussels is because of the impact and the burden of brain disorders So altogether, neurological and mental disorders are the #1 cause of disability. That's the graph that you can see on the upper side. It's coming from the IHME, the Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation in Seattle, in the US. And according to their data, you can see that this burden is expected to continue to rise in the coming years. Below, you can see the impact in terms of mortality of brain disorders. And globally and in Europe, brain disorders altogether are the second cause of mortality. So this toll is really something still largely under-recognized, but also it is a toll that prompts us for an urgent need for action and finding the right responses to address that unmet need. And obviously the emergence of new technologies besides, let's say, more classical treatment is now coming as a very strong opportunity. So as EBC, we are a network fostering cooperation between our member organizations, promoting dialogue, but primarily raising awareness and advocating to EU institutions to make sure that we have robust and ambitious health policies tackling the unmet needs posed by brain disorders. So we bring together patient organizations, scientific and professional societies, a network of national brain councils and industry partners in the many different disciplines having a stake in the brain space. And in doing so, we, as part of the many activities, we develop projects. You will here have a couple of examples of what we are doing in terms of fostering, let's say, this notion of collaboration, but also of awareness in the space of brain health, brain research, brain innovation, but also how we foster the implementation of research breakthroughs into clinical practice to bridge the gap within the community, but also how to provide evidence to policymakers. So I'll make here a deep dive on the project called Brain Teaser, because it's really relevant to provide a kind of exemplar on how we are involved in this type of evidence generation, but also here on how neurotechnologies were embedded into clinical practice, because it's a very interesting example as to how artificial intelligence was tested, validated, and developed in order to support care provision in the context of multiple sclerosis and ALS. Because it really provided an example as to how the emergence and implementation of those technologies could improve patient care, but also get to a more accurate feedback between patients and clinicians, but also empower patients and caregivers, improved cost efficiency, but also have an interesting way to provide feedback into research and science more generally. So basically the model was providing for an integration of clinical data, environment data, but also real world data via sensors and apps into an artificial intelligence based model. And we had different centers testing the clinical validation in order to actually provide two key improvements into the care pathway. It was not only to improve the clinical decision making, but also to empower patients in their self-monitoring and self-management of the care. And I think here it's really important to emphasize this as a key feature, because it's so common to so many of the disorders of the brain that we are looking after. So it's not only MS or ALS or other neurodegenerative diseases, but it's also in the case of migraine, for instance, or others, that patients are really, let's say, the primary decision taker when it comes to the management of their condition and the management of their disease, and they are the experts by definition of their own disorder. So the fact that we could here integrate technologies to enable them and empower them in that position was extremely important. So last but not least, Braintease also contributed to enhancing the regulatory framework for the ethical use of AI. And particularly as here, we identified that there was clearly a gap in that respect. So on that basis, EBC also started a reflection process to initiate a European Charter on the responsible development of neurotechnologies. So in doing so, we have started and we have built upon the initiative taken at the country level, in particular in France, where they had a French charter. But we felt that it was only making sense to develop this kind of initiative if it was really transnational. So the idea here was really to make sure that we could leverage on the great potential of neurotech, such as DBS, such as brain-computer interfaces, or the many other medical technologies that you heard of in the previous presentation. But it was also to make sure that we had some sort of control or some sort of recommendation and oversight regarding the scientific foundation and scientific evidence, but also the efficacy of those solutions, as well as ways to provide for an ethical supervision. Also, the charter is meant to come in complement to some of the regulations that already exist. So you will see here a few of the, let's say, most important pieces of regulation at EU level that we have mapped out. The regulation that we are all familiar with now on or data protection, but also the EU Act on Artificial Intelligence. But still, in spite of these many pieces of regulation and legislation, there were still a few gaps and grey areas that we felt needed to be filled. So the charter builds on existing mechanism of governance and complements this legislation. And on the basis of a thorough consultation of our membership of the public, we will be launching the charter in the course of April after validation of all the great input that we have collected. So it is made up of different key elements, not less than 9, as you will see on the slide. So dealing with people in situations of vulnerability, the reliability, safety, security of the technologies, ways of preventing their misuse and malicious applications, establishing mechanism of oversight, as I said earlier, the specific nature of neural data and why they need specific protection. And then additional elements such as education in neurotech and the ethical implications, the ethical communication around neurotechnologies, which we felt was also very important, but then also considering support for the emergence of neurotechnology and taking also societal values into consideration. So this is about the charter, but I think it's important I also say a word about, let's say, mechanism of engagement with the community. And in that respect, it was extremely relevant. I said a word about the Brain Innovation Days, which is an initiative that EBC launched 5 years ago. The idea being that we celebrate and showcase innovation in the brain space on the occasion of this event, but also on the occasion of the community activation that we generate around that event. As you will see, it relates to patients, scientists, professionals, but also policymakers, industry representatives, regulators, but also investors, anyone who has a genuine interest into the brain space. And this is where we find that we have the right context or the right environment in order to generate roundtables, meetings, discussions around the key issues pertaining to the development and the emergence of innovation in our space, and hence the charter on neurotech was also one of the key issues of discussion in the previous edition of the Brain Innovation Days. And we look forward to organizing this type of debate on a regular basis in this framework. Just for the record, I'm sharing with you the team and sub-teams of this year's edition. It will be focused on the adaptive brain and building resilience in a fast and evolving world, with the different sub-teams that you can see on the screen. And you're all warmly invited to attend on the 15th and 16th of October in Brussels for this edition of the Brain Innovation Days. I'll finish here and thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to receive any question that you may have.
Thank you very much, Frédéric. Thank you very much. Is there a question while we are setting up for the next talk? Yes, please go ahead. Yeah, Mike.
Frédéric, thanks a lot for the talk. I speak up. Hopefully you can hear me. Can you confirm? Okay. So I think you touched upon a very important aspect. That is that at the moment the market is flooded by non-medical devices that make claims of the effects they may have. And we, working as professionals in the scientific domain, really are afraid that these promises may be overdone. So I think thinking in a direction of regulating these, I think, would be really welcome from our side. On the other side, adding new regulations in this European chapter should not come with additional restrictions that we have on doing proper academic science. We do feel that at the moment, the MDR specifically is really impeding the progress that you would like to make in a much faster pace. So maybe not just adding rules, but also making it lighter on other aspects where experience shows that this could be done without harm.
Could you understand?
Three elements of answer on this. You're absolutely right that we are flooded with, let's say, digital tools, digital solutions, apps, and whatnot. So we have an issue there to ensure that there is a sound validation of those options. That's one of the let's say elements that prompted us to develop the charter. But also, I think it's important to see it as a charter of ethical principles. So it's not a regulation or rules, but we really wanted to accompany the development and really make sure, as you saw, there is an element saying we want to continue fostering the emergence of those neurotech because we are strong believers of the fact that they are offering great solutions. The only problem, and you rightfully point to an example of what I would call very politely a lack of fitness for purpose of the existing regulatory framework that we are having. Because either it is too restrictive, and then some of the great solutions that could certainly enter our healthcare systems are kind of blocked and filtered out, and then enter the kind of what I would call the leisure or the kind of more entertaining use, rather than being, let's say, evidenced and entering, let's say, a practice of or follow-up or management of different conditions. And with the medical device regulation, we have this fantastic example that how we made something complex inherently even more complex by adding on stupid rules and unnecessary bureaucracy that is making it really impossible to even have access to basic devices in the space. And we could certainly have a lengthy discussion about that in another meeting.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's do that in another meeting. Thank you very much, Frédéric, once again.
My pleasure. Thank you for the invitation.
Thanks. Okay. Then we go to the next presentation. That's a special presentation by our students, and so the interesting thing is also the same students also helped a lot in organizing this whole event. So I would say already before they give the talk, give them a warm and a very hard applause for that. Thanks. And but more interestingly, they also, they want to tell what their opinion is from a student perspective on neurotechnology, and they also did a survey on that among the students. So very interested to hear what you want to say, Arthur. Together with Camille, other people, they did that. So please go ahead. Just stand there. Yeah. Okay.
So hello everybody, good afternoon. So as Richard already told you, I'm Camille, and here in front sits Arthur, my fellow student and friend. So yeah, we will talk about our student perspective on neurotechnology. So it started somewhere in January when we had our first meeting with all the organizers, and then our professor Richard asked us a question very bluntly. So what do you as students think of neurotechnology and the use of AI in the latter? Well, Art and I thought, okay, we cannot answer this question directly, so we sat down after the meeting and we discussed it a bit. But then we really felt that we couldn't really represent the entire Dutch student community to give an appropriate answer to this. So what we did, we proposed to conduct a survey on the student opinion of neurotechnology. So before I give you the results or show you the results about this survey, the next question comes to mind, and the question will be, why students? Why should you take us as policymakers? Why should you take us into account when it comes to making your policies and legislations on this topic? Well, let me explain that to you with 3 simple reasons. First of all, we are the current users of technological innovations, and we will be the future stakeholders, innovators, and users of this technology. But since most of us are not yet 25, we also have an incompletely developed brain, which means that we are still vulnerable to technological innovations. So then the next question comes to mind, which is, what should be the focal points that you should focus on as policymaker when you are creating these policies and legislations? So to answer that question, we have conducted a survey. So let's go to the survey. So we structured it in the following way. We started the survey we did in English and in Dutch, since we have a lot of international students, as you may know. And we started with general questions about where they lived and what their study background was. Then we followed it up with the topic of neurotechnology, where we wanted to know their opinion and their prior knowledge on the topic. Then we asked the same questions about AI in neurotechnology. And we also want to know what their opinion was on the involvement of big tech companies, since, as you all may know, take for example Elon Musk, Neuralink is a very broad topic at this moment. So we asked them some questions about that. And then we want to close the survey with questions on what do you think should be the role of the government in this? Like, should they regulate, control, fund, or maybe do nothing with the developments of neurotechnology? So let's go to the results of our survey. So we started with some general questions, and what we got was 83 responses, which means we cannot fully represent the entire Dutch student community, but we can formulate an informed opinion on this topic. So what we also found was that we had 75% of our respondents had a scientific background, which makes us expect that we have a bias in our results. But we will see that later in the results, if that's true or not. So the topic of neurotechnology, our results. Before this question, we started to ask, do you know what neurotechnology entails? Because you have to ask that, and most of them did, which confirms our bias a bit. But then we want to know from them, how often have you heard about it last in the past times? So what they said in general, they heard about it weekly or monthly. Then we want to know from them, where did you hear about neurotechnology, if you heard about it? Like on social media, on your phone, or maybe in newspapers. So in general, most of them said they heard about it via the university, which is kind of logical with the bias that we have in our results. But you also see that a lot of them saw something about it on social media and read about it in the newspapers, which makes us think that students still read the newspaper, which is nice because a lot of people say we don't read enough. And in addition, social media can also be a big influence to how we perceive neurotechnology, like can it be positive or negative? Social media has a big impact on that. So then we want to know, okay, what was the tone of the message? Was it positive or negative? Do we already have to stress about neurotechnology? Well, most people said that there's a that the message was positive. So in that way, we think that we don't have to stress yet about that we get a lot of negative information about this neurotechnology, and makes us think, okay, we don't need to act immediately on this yet. So we followed up with AI in neurotechnology, or the use of it, and we want to couple that to their opinion and knowledge on the topic. So we first saw from the questions that most of them use it in their daily life, and furthermore, we want to know, how do you feel about advancements in AI? Well, most of them were somewhat concerned, and since we have a bias in our results, probably, we think that the level of concern would even be higher if you ask a broader audience, since then people may know less about AI and neurotechnology. Then we asked the same questions for the usage of AI in neurotechnology, and then we saw that people were somewhat concerned about it again, and again we expect them to have a high level of concern, even a higher level when you do this survey with a broader audience. But like to come to a conclusion, we also want to ask them the question, very bluntly, an open question on what is your opinion about AI and neurotechnology. So we did that, but Arthur will tell you the results from that and what it means.
Yes, thank you, Camille. Yeah, I'm Arthur, and I'll walk you through the rest of our survey. As Camille said, we wanted to get a general conclusion from just the idea of neurotechnology and AI, and so we asked our students what is their opinion on the use of AI specifically in neurotechnology. Most of the positives were pretty obvious, so helping out people in need, for example, deaf people, people that cannot see, people that lost limbs, all of that. But the conclusion was that the societal impact will, in general, be positive. However, when we came up to, or what our students came up with negatives, was mainly the ethical questions. So questions about privacy and security of the data that goes through neurotechnology. Ethical issues like AI unpredictability, there's a lot of data generated, how that affects our brain. But what was most interesting for us was the fact that students have already, on their own, started talking about the corporate and governmental control. Since I will get into that later, which we had prepared more specific questions for that. But it was interesting for us to see that even if we don't ask about that before, students already think about that and consider it a pretty pressing issue. With that, the main issue that they saw was that they believe that neurotechnology and AI is advancing very rapidly, and for that we have insufficient laws and guidelines. So in general, we could see a cautious optimism. So continuing with the big tech questions and companies, we asked them what they think their involvement, how their involvement is. A lot of people thought this was harmful. We did not expect this because of our bias coming in, but since this already, with the informed group of people who have answered, they already believe it's harmful, we would expect this to be even worse in a broader public. We then asked them for Neuralink as a specific example, which we saw the results to be the same, which was not surprising to us. And we wanted to know if they themselves know more about the medical side or if they know more about the commercial side of neurotechnology, for which you can see they mostly know about the medical side. That was not surprising given their scientific backgrounds. Then we asked them about the role of the government, which was our main focal point of the survey in general. We asked them what the role of the government should be. As you can see, most answers were that the government should have a role in the market. However, almost nobody said that it should be fully controlled by the government or that the government should not have any role whatsoever. And most of the people believe that they should either regulate, partially fund, or oversee the development of this technology. We then asked if they are happy with how much the government tells the public and specifically students about neurotechnology, advancements, laws and guidelines related to this. And most people said that they would like more information and they don't see, they would just need more information. Which brings me to our conclusion and our ending remarks. We know that students do want more information, and this usually comes from the stress of not knowing. They believe that the insufficient laws and guidelines are mainly because of how rapidly AI is developing and neurotechnology is developing. However, we know that that fear is slightly inconsistent with the reality. As also Luke said before, the development of neurotechnology takes time and might not happen in decades in some sense. But the broad public of the student body does not believe so, and so that creates the fear of the unknown. And for that, we would then urge more information to be put out, because then, yeah, less stress will be generated. As a final remark, we would like to thank our Professor Richard for inviting us here, and also Neurotech EU for organizing this whole event. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Is there a question from the audience on this presentation? Luke, yeah.
What faculties go to students too? Is it more or less neuroscience or?
This was mostly science, biology, AI, scientific faculties, but we've had a minority of arts, business there as well. But yes, the majority was from scientific backgrounds, so faculty of science, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
I encourage you to ask your questions directly to Arthur and Camille in the coffee break that we have now, please.
And let's say that we have 5 minutes extra for the coffee break. So 3:05, we will start here again in this room.
Thank you.
And have lively discussions indeed. Okay, we start again. So I'm not going to present. There are 3 researchers from the Donders Institute that will present their work on techniques that are being used here at the Donders Institute. And the first one is Soa. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Am I audible enough for everyone in the audience? Okay, perfect. Thank you for having me here, and I feel like everyone is back from their coffee break. They're ready for some more packed program, I think. But so far we have discussed how we can read the brain mainly, for instance, the fMRI study that Luke presented earlier this afternoon. But I want to focus about neuromodulation. So if you remember correctly from one of his slides, the lower bottom of the screen, how we can influence brain activity. And for that, I'm going to focus on focused ultrasound stimulation. But to zoom back a little bit, you're probably all already familiar with ultrasound being used in the clinic. For instance, it's being used to make pictures of babies in the womb. And the method that they use is just very high frequency sound waves that are outside of our hearing range. And those sound waves can generate images. Now, if we focus those same sound waves, just like we could with light through a magnifying glass, we can create one point of highest intensity, and that's essentially what focused ultrasound is. You can increase that intensity and use it as a surgical method to, for instance, ablate or remove parts of the brain that is malfunctioning in some of the patients. This is called high-intensity focused ultrasound, and a huge benefit of this method is that no scalpel is needed. Sound waves can travel through their skin and their skull, and can pretty much end up anywhere in the brain that you want them to. And you can imagine that for the patients, this is an incredible advantage because the recovery time is way less if no surgery is performed. Okay, but as I mentioned, I just want to make clear this is high-intensity focused ultrasound. This is something that they're doing around the world already. They're setting it up, I think, in Amsterdam as well. Not what we're doing at the Donders. We lower the intensity way less, and with low focused ultrasound, you can do other stuff. So for instance, it can be used to open the blood-brain barrier, so the blood vessels in the brain, which could make it easier for drug delivery. So the drugs that you give your patients can have a higher efficiency. But what we do at the Donders mainly right now is use it for neuromodulation. So what is neuromodulation exactly? Simply put, is a way to modulate or change brain activity. And the nice thing about focused ultrasound stimulation as a neuromodulation tool is that it's non-invasive. You don't have to open anything. The effects are reversible. So with high frequency ultrasound, if you ablate a part of the brain, you can't undo that. But with low intensity focused ultrasound, all the effects are reversible. And you can target pretty much anywhere in the brain. The reason that we're interested in developing this method is, as you may know, brain diseases affect 1 in 4 people. And the current therapies that we have are not effective for all of the patients, unfortunately. So we do need new methods to decrease the symptoms, enhance the current therapies that we have, and help the brain learn again. And really hope that applying ultrasound can help us with that. And we think and we hope that because for most conditions, the affected brain regions lie deep in the brain, so not the outside of the brain. And the current techniques that we have for non-invasive brain stimulation, such as TMS, magnetic stimulation or electrical stimulation, are limited to only the cortex of the brain, so the outside. And the therapies that we do have to target deep brain structures, like deep brain stimulation, are quite invasive, so you have to physically plant the electrode in the brain. As I said earlier, ultrasound has the ability to travel through skin and bone and end up anywhere, so that's a huge advantage. It's also already being used. So this is a pretty cool study in which they wanted to reduce tremor in patients by using focused ultrasound, low intensity focused ultrasound. What they did, they targeted a brain region that is very deep in the brain with low intensity focused ultrasound, and they measured its effects on the reduction of the tremor. And you can see in the yellow box over there, that's when the ultrasound was turned on, you can see that the tremor already decreased. Another study focused on chronic pain patients. Also remarkable results. You can see that the blue line represents the patient population that received ultrasound treatment, and they reported to have way less pain symptoms up until 7 days after their ultrasound treatment, especially if you compare it to the placebo group, the orange or red line that you see above. They did not receive ultrasound treatment. And finally, this is a study from West Virginia in the US where they wanted to use ultrasound to treat patients with addiction. So what they did is they treated those patients with ultrasound, and these patients reported less cravings, less opioid cravings up until 90 days after ultrasound. You might be thinking, okay, ultrasound is amazing, why are we not using it already in the clinic? If results are too good to be true, they probably are, and we get back to that in a minute. So while there's already research groups using it in a clinical setting, or I should say like for clinical trials, there's luckily also a lot of research being done in understanding what ultrasound is doing. This is done a lot in animal models. So in this study, they use different protocols of ultrasound, essentially different settings of your ultrasound machine to see what the best effects are and the highest effects in mice, for instance. But we're also testing how ultrasound works in humans. So in my own PhD, we were interested in the safety, efficacy of ultrasound, but also how to individualize ultrasound protocols. And I'm going to give you a quick glimpse into the efficacy part of the study. In this study, the participants played a computer game in which they were required to look either to the left or the right side of the screen while they were receiving ultrasound stimulation of 2 brain parts that are involved in making these eye movements. And what we saw is when we stimulated the left frontal eye field, so the brain part that is involved in making eye movements to the right, they made more eye movements to the right. And when we stimulated the right hemisphere, they made more eye movements to the left. So we could enhance their performance in that way. But I also want to say, it's not that applying ultrasound to these participants made them make eye movements. So we could only bias ongoing processes. So that's also, I think, a take-home message that I want to give you regarding at least ultrasound stimulation. It's not something to control the mind. We can only nudge them to a certain direction or bias them, but the people, like the participants in this study, they had to start the eye movements themselves. We couldn't start that for them with ultrasound. And so while a lot of research is being done on understanding it, some people are already working on its future. So these researchers in London have created a device that is able to stimulate with a precision of only a couple of millimeters, so basically the grain of a rice. That's super impressive. But as you can see also, like, it's not the most user-friendly device. So at the same time, we're also working on making it portable and wearable, and I think maybe a wearable and portable option could be beneficial in the lab. It would give us researchers a lot more freedom to conduct different kind of experiments, but also maybe for patients at home to reduce their symptoms at home. And finally, while we are using ultrasound to modulate the brain, if we go back to the roots of ultrasound, which is imaging, we can also, they're also working on developing focused ultrasound or not focused, but ultrasound to image blood flow in the brain, up until also very high precision. And this could be a very effective tool for diagnostics, but also for us to better understand the brain. Okay, but we're here to talk about opportunities and risks of neurotechnology. And one of the big risks, I think, when you create neurotechnology is safety. This is something that we also really take into account in the field. That's why the iTrust Consortium is developed. It's a consortium that exists of international experts in ultrasound, and together with the FDA and the EMA, they have created standardized safety protocols that is being used by everyone in the field. Another issue might be the distributive inequality. So you want to make sure that the method that you're developing is not only accessible to the wealthy. But the nice thing actually about ultrasound is that it's much cheaper than some of the other alternatives like deep brain stimulation. So ultrasound, when developed properly, the billions instead of only a few. And finally, when you think about brain stimulation, I think a lot of the people some people that I talk about brain stimulation, for instance, my friends that are not in science, they're immediately thinking about mind control, that we can control their thoughts, what they're doing. And that's just science fiction, and there's not a lot of science behind it because, as I mentioned, at least ultrasound is not able to control what you're doing. It's only able to bias ongoing behavior. It's able to modulate brain activity. But as a person, you need to make the first step yourself. And I want to finish up with the scientific ethical implications. This is something that in our research group we consider a lot. I'm sure you're all familiar with the hype cycle. When a new technology is introduced, it's super popular, everyone wants to work with it. But if you don't do rigorous research, you don't control your experimental setup very well, you could create a replication crisis, which could lead to the field losing its credibility before it reaches the plateau of productivity. And I just want to go back to what I said in the beginning of this talk, is that ultrasound it would be a shame if we end up in the hype cycle with ultrasound, because it does have a lot of potential to understand the brain and also to treat the brain. But we should be careful about the studies that we're reading. For instance, the West Virginia study in addiction patients. They didn't have a control group, and also these patients, they were addicts that were picked from the street. They didn't have a house, so they were put in a clinic. They gave them like a lot of attention, a lot of also therapy, and maybe that's the reason that they didn't fall back into their old patterns. So I think it's very important to have well-controlled studies and be very transparent about your findings to make sure to advance ultrasound to its full potential. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, let's have the next speaker, Saman. Vinke, so we'll talk about what was mentioned by Soa, another technique to modulate brain activity, DBS, deep brain stimulation.
So thanks very much for the kind invitation and the impossible talk to explain adaptive DBS in just 10 minutes. I'll do my best though. I'm a neurosurgeon from across the street, specialized in deep brain stimulation. Work in this field for already over 10 years, so have seen a little bit of the development of adaptive DBS, and that's what we will be talking about. Yes, okay. So conventional DBS. DBS is not new, it's around for roughly 35 years. And what we do is we tactically place electrodes in deep brain structures. Mostly for Parkinson's disease, within the subthalamic nucleus, the most common target for Parkinson's disease, which is a coffee bean shaped structure just above the midbrain. And the electrode is put into that nucleus, and the activity of that nucleus can be modulated by applying current to that particular structure. Conventional deep brain stimulation is based on a continuous delivery of a pulse block stimulation in which you can adjust some parameters, as seen in the bottom left figure. And the system consists of either one or two electrodes placed in the brain structures, connected by an extension cable to a neuro pacemaker, usually put in just below the clavicle. Now let's move to the concept of adaptive DBS, where the same kind of hardware is being used. And the concept of adaptive deep brain stimulation is to only apply the current when certain biomarkers express disease features. So for Parkinson's disease, the off state can be characterized by oscillations in the beta band. You see that in the bottom figure, the gray column there, that's the beta band. And the idea is that only when those oscillations are present, just apply stimulation in the same nucleus and have the beneficial effect only when you need it, because stimulation can also give you side effects instead of therapeutic benefits. There's a lot of variations on adaptive DBS. So there's just a stimulation response when the biomarker reaches a certain threshold. That's the upper graph. Then you can ramp stimulation, or you can have some proportional relationship with the biomarker and the stimulation. So again, 10 years ago, when we were exploring adaptive deep brain stimulation, we had to externalize the leads. So we had to put in leads, and I still remember us putting leads in through the skin to outside, so we could do some research and measurements in London, where we used computer interfaces, amplifiers to record the signals and to apply stimulation at the same time. And over time, technology evolved. So there was a pulse generator coming available just for research purposes. So it was an investigational device that could be implanted and transcutaneously could read out local field potentials. So it could sense and stimulate at the same time. And that further developed towards a CE marked device or FDA approved device, which is completely implantable at the moment. And that's why adaptive DBS has come into the news again just a couple of weeks ago. Then there's always people that crank it up a notch. That's what you see here. This is a study from the San Francisco group published in Nature Medicine. They implanted 4 patients. Well, actually, they implanted a cohort of 18 patients. 4 of them are mentioned in this paper. Those patients did not just get DBS electrodes in the deep brain structures, but also got a grid electrode placed over the motor cortex. And what they looked at, so 18 of this group was 18 patients, and only these 4 out of 18 did not get a complete symptom relief. So they looked into, can we find another biomarker based on what happens in the motor cortex, instead of looking at the beta band. So what they found is that the gamma oscillations that are created by the motor cortex are actually a more strong predictor of the off condition of some PD phenomenon. And they use that as a trigger for adaptive DBS. But just by looking at the picture, this system requires 2 electrodes in the deep brain structures. It requires 2 grid electrodes over the motor cortex, and it requires 2 pulse generators, because the pulse generators only have two channels. So it's way more invasive than an ordinary DBS operation. But it got hyped based on this paper. And this is a very exceptional group of patients that got implanted with a very strange configuration set of electrodes in the first place. So can we extract this to all Parkinson's patients, yes or no? And that's where the media comes in. Social media gets more important by the hour, I would say. And the media attention was ginormous about this paper. And just recently, some centers in the country started to use ADBS programming that just got FDA approval and CE mark in a standard, in a research fashion, but it got sold like a car. So nowadays, the patients come in and they say, I want this device because that's going to be the future. But there's no clear evidence, no good studies proving this efficacy. And what we've seen over the years, and we've seen it with focused ultrasound as well, as already said, it's very, very, very sensitive to hypes and fashion. Patients just want to get the newest iPhone, so to say. And it's our duty to give that context, to perform proper research. And if this is if this is indeed better than the conventional DBS, then we should explore that. But at the moment, it is not. And that's the problem of neuromodulation and applying neurotechnology to patient space. Patients read social media, they read scientific papers, they come in to the clinic room with the papers in the hand, they printed it, and they say, okay, this is what I want, without asking what do you. We did is look at 4 patients in 5 conditions. So that on means on medication, on stimulation, and at the bottom off medication, on stimulation. And what you see in the left figure is LFP recordings in those 5 conditions for the left and the right brain electrode. So what you see is that in the off conditions of the disease, so off, on-off, where the medication starts to kick in, and on, you see the oscillations in the beta band disappear. And that is what, that's a proper biomarker. But if you look in the right patients, so patient 2, 3, and 4, you cannot find a signature in the beta band. So what if these patients were implanted to have adaptive DBS and you could not find a signature? What happens next? And that's something we should be thinking about. If we develop a new method and call it adaptive DBS, which is in fact a clinical application of a brain-computer interface, then it should work for more than 25% of the patients. And of course, it's just 4 patients, but all the trials that have been done so far, there's a lot of dropout because no proper biomarker can be found. Then there's the cost aspect. So a normal DBS implantation, just the implants, is about 13,000 euros per patient. Today, just today, the prices of a rechargeable sensing device that is capable of performing adaptive DBS is almost double the price. So given the shortage of healthcare budget in this country, it kind of means that you can treat less patients with the same amount of money. So that's something you have to think very carefully about before we start doing this for every single patient. Of course, the purpose of this all is to adapt the DBS therapy to a patient-specific needs and to create as much symptom relief as you probably could. And there are also other ways to look at that. One way is based on imaging, based on imaging that is patient-specific, that is site-specific, so left and right. So what we could do, and that's what my group is working on a lot, is do image-guided programming of DBS based on modeling of pathway activations that are correlated with a beneficial effect on the Parkinson's symptoms. The huge advantage of this approach is that you don't need any hardware to adopt this method. You can do it with patients that have a 30-year-old system implanted. It's just a mathematical way of looking at activation of pathway and predicting what type of activation for that particular patient with a set of disease symptoms would be beneficial. And that's something we should outweigh. So costs, effectivity, and other alternatives that are more widely applicable than just giving a whole expensive set of implants to a patient. So take-home messages from my side. Technological innovation leads most certainly to new opportunities for research and potentially to improved therapeutical options, and it's very important to keep doing that all together. So preclinical science and translating it into clinical practice. Improvement of efficacy has to be proven before you can translate it into daily clinical practice and make it a standardized therapy. And we have to be aware of, are those additional costs and risks, adding another pair of electrodes to the motor cortex, it's not without risks to do that. Are those additional risks and costs justified? So what's the societal impact? Can we indeed implant only half the patients if we increase the implant costs? And we already implant only 10% of the patients that are actually eligible for DBS therapy. So it's already the tip of the iceberg. Are we going to reduce that tip by just adding adaptive DBS? Does it work for all patients? I've showed in 4 patients that it most certainly does not work for all patients, but for how many patients does it work? And this is very difficult, patients should not be submitted to hypes and fashion. And it's particularly difficult because a lot of scientists and doctors are active on social media. They are enthusiastic about their research and the results, and it's difficult for a patient to give that context. So we should provide that context for them. And a personal issue for me, and that's it's mentioned before already, are we creating a rich man's treatment? The treatment should be widely available for every single patient. It should not matter where you are born, in some third world country or in the States or in Europe. Everybody should have the same right and access to a certain treatment. And that's also our duty as scientists and clinicians. I'm more than happy to take a couple of questions if there are any.
Thanks, Saman. Thank you very much. Let's leave the questions for during the panel discussion. There we have ample time for questions. I would like to ask the next speaker, Florian, to give an overview of his work.
Yes, thank you very much. Is this working?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Right. So I'm going to talk about neurofeedback and how we use this here at the Donders, specifically in relation to stress-related disorders. So to give you a bit of a background why we're doing this, mental health issues are, of course, a major global threat. They have really high prevalence, they have really high disease burden, and the efforts to reduce their impact remained quite unsuccessful in the past. If anything, they're actually going up. So that kind of indicates that the current treatment approaches are not sufficiently effective. And this has led to sort of a shift away from treatment-oriented research to more prevention and health maintenance-oriented research. And it also signals an urgent need for innovative additional treatment modalities. And one interesting thing is that one very critical transdiagnostic factor for many of these illnesses is prolonged and repeated exposure to stressors. So what you usually see is that if someone is exposed to a stressor, that affects their mental health shortly, but then people bounce back from that, they recover. But if you have prolonged and repeated exposure to stressors, then that recovery and bouncing back doesn't really work. So your resilience, as we call it, is going down. And that might set you up for a path towards a mental illness. Now, understanding that process also opens an opportunity for us, namely the opportunity to intervene early if we can identify at-risk moments just before people actually become ill, and then find interventions to put them back on track. And from a neuroscientific perspective, to find interventions, we have to look at what actually happens in the brain after stressors. So what stress does to the brain is actually quite global, so you don't see a very specific area lighting up. What actually happens is that a lot of different brain networks are involved in this. And in particularly interesting are those two networks, the salience network and the executive control network. So the salience network is associated with vigilance and being alert, and the executive control network is associated with goal-directed behavior. So what happens after a stressor is the following. You see that resources are shifted towards the salience network. And that kind of makes sense, right? So if you're exposed to a stressor, you kind of have to be vigilant and attentive to actually understand what the threat is and to evaluate it. But then at some point also you have to act on it. And that's where this active reversal happens, where the resources are shifted back to the executive control network so you can act. And this is a healthy response, a healthy stress response. But if that becomes maladaptive, then that might go wrong. And people might not be able to do that shift. So from a neuroscientific perspective, what we're trying to do is to help people make that shift again. So how can we do this? Enter neurofeedback. So what is neurofeedback? Neurofeedback is a specific form of biofeedback where an individual is presented in real time with the moment-to-moment state of a specific brain signal with the goal of learning the voluntary self-regulation of that signal. So basically what you do is you create this loop where a participant is, for instance, in the fMRI scanner, and we assess brain activity in real time, and then feed that back to the participant in form, in some visual or auditory form, for instance, in form of a thermometer display like here. And then the participant can see the brain activity at any moment in time, something they are usually, of course, not aware of, and they can use this information to try to change that. And the interesting part about neurofeedback over other neuromodulation techniques is twofold. So one is that it actually can target these more complex interactions between large-scale brain networks, which is not necessarily very easy with standard neuromodulation techniques, which usually target very focal parameters in the brain. And the second one is that it's what I call endogenous neuromodulation. So what do I mean by this? So if you look at the treatment modalities, and especially focus on the ones that actually directly target the brain, then we have exogenous and endogenous neuromodulation techniques. So the exogenous ones are brain stimulation and pharmacology. And what I mean with exogenous here is that in order to bring about the change in the brain, you need something external, right? So you need some external device to stimulate, or you need a drug to do the stimulation. So the change brought about in the brain is actually from the outside. While for neurofeedback, the change actually comes from within. And in that sense, it's a bit more comparable to things like mindfulness, for instance, where you learn in a training procedure also certain strategies that you then can apply outside of that setting and bring about the change from the inside. The difference being here, of course, that what you learn with neurofeedback is something about a very specific neural signal and how to regulate that. And that is very interesting for translating these results to real-life scenarios, right? So what we want to do is we want to address brain networks, but we want to address brain networks and change brain networks in response to acute stressors. And I say this again, we want to do this in response to acute stressors. And those stressors, of course, they occur in real life. They don't occur in the lab setting, they don't occur during treatment moments. So that means we also have to address them in real life. And neurofeedback can do this by having this two-step procedure where you first train in a lab with all the machinery you want, and people learn mental strategies to actually bring about that change, and then they can hopefully transfer that to a situation outside of that lab scenario, to a situation, for instance, in real life, where they're actually exposed to real stressors, as a form of ecological momentary neuromodulation. And that means that neurofeedback can be used as part of just-in-time adaptive interventions in daily life. So where you indeed try to figure out if someone is at risk, for instance, by using mobile health technologies like mobile phones and smartwatches, and then at the moment they are at risk, just before they slip into the disorder, you give them prospective neurofeedback training, so they learn how to regulate that network balance, and they then can apply that knowledge afterwards in response to stresses in daily life. So that's the idea, that's the theory. So where are we practically on this? So a couple of years ago, we have implemented this network neurofeedback paradigm, and actually we're the first to implement this here at the Donders. Basically, it's a real-time fMRI-based neurofeedback paradigm which targets exactly this balance between those two networks. So what we do is we show participants this gray disk and then simply ask them to make that disk larger or smaller on demand. And then we give them feedback on how they're doing. Now the size of the disk, of course, corresponds with the balance of those two networks in real time. And if we do this a couple of times, often enough, so after lots of repetition, different training sessions, we see that after time, people actually learn to successfully self-regulate that balance. And maybe more importantly, not only do they learn this, but if we then take away the feedback, they can still do it, which actually means that they actually learned some transferable skill here. And also, they can do it under the prospect of an electric shock, so basically under acute stress. When we give them the prospect of an electric shock on the fingertips, they can still do it. And if we look at the brain, at the whole brain, we also nicely see that how over the training sessions, what they learn is actually something about large-scale distributed networks and not about very local areas. Now this is a really robust effect. We've replicated this now several times. And what we also found, which is very important, is that if we ask them to do this again after a month, so they have the training, we show they have a transfer effect right after the training, and then we ask them to do this a month later, they can still do this. And this is really important because this actually shows that this is a lasting effect, a lasting skill, at least to some degree, which is of course important if you want to translate this to real life. And speaking about real life, when we ask them to actually apply the strategies they now learned from their training in real life, in response to stressors in their daily life, we see that the better they learned from the training, so the better they were in the self-regulation in the lab, the less stressful they report these events they apply the regulation to in real life, which we measure with mobile technologies. All right, so this is the state we are currently at, still very much at the beginning. But we're now working towards clinical applications on the one side by applying this in the context of mindfulness training, so combining it with mindfulness, and on the other side by applying it more specifically in the context of post-traumatic stress syndrome. And with that, thank you very much.
Thanks. Thank you very much. So now we would like to go to another online presentation. And we are very happy that Daphna Feinholz from the UNESCO, Chief of Bioethics and the Ethics of Science and Technology at UNESCO, is willing to present her views on neurotechnology and society.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm really pleased to be here with you. And what I'm going to do is to, what I'm going to do is to share with you, as I was requested, is the work that UNESCO is doing on. So it's not a technical, it's not a technical presentation and very interesting as the previous ones, but I hope that still will be interesting for you because this is about what UNESCO is doing in this field, as it was requested to share with you. So I will very briefly talk to you about what we have been doing first on the ethical side. UNESCO has developed a report on ethics of neurotechnologies, and we have also have a publication on economic landscape. How did UNESCO received the mandate to develop a recommendation on ethics of neurotechnologies? And I will explain to you, even if it's mentioned at the end, the process and the roadmap, but when we are, but I want to also share with you what is the recommendation looks like at this point, and some of the main features, so you will have an idea. And of course, although I will say it at the end, I'm just sharing with you the kind of a draft. and the main issues, but still the details not, because this document will still be negotiated by member states. So very quickly, there is a study, we did a study in UNESCO unveiling the neurotechnology landscape, which was looking more about the economical part, and we can see here what some of the figures from the 2001-2021, the rapid growth of investment in also in first of all in neuroscientific publications, but also in innovation measured by patents, and also the growth in the investment in the technologies as well. But we also see that there is an equal development and access both in the knowledge that is generating and also the impact of these publications. And that's already a very important indication of who is kind of developing, owning the technologies, who is kind of potentially benefiting from it. And at the same time, it's also very linked to some very important ethical questions. And as you know, UNESCO has 2 advisory bodies on bioethics and ethics of science and technology. One of them is the IBC, International Bioethics Committee. There are 36 independent experts that they are appointed by the Director General with different backgrounds. They are not representing their governments, they represent their own views. And they present and they prepare lots of reports for more than 30 years already. They have been doing it. And these reports are giving always some guidance to member states and different stakeholders on some suggestions on some concrete actions to take. And sometimes these reports pave the way to normative instrument, which was the case of the report that the IBC prepared on ethics of neurotechnology. I really encourage you to read it, and we would love to have also your feedback. But this report has identified a very wide range of ethical issues. You are most familiar with them. And of course, there are many more things, but I'm just highlighting some, which is the brain integrity and human dignity, the personal identity and psychological continuity, the autonomy and freedom of thought, mental privacy, accessibility and social justice, which is a bit linked to my last slide, but also to others, like what will happen in case of enhancement, for example, and the prices, etc., etc. Then there are also some cross-cutting ethical issues and concerns, some such as discrimination, interest of the child and adolescent because of the particular moment in the development of the brain that they are, and of course the issue of informed consent. Now, why UNESCO? UNESCO is the UN organization. I mean, in the UN system, we have a very special mandate on bioethics and ethics of science and technology, because the idea is to link the developments of science and technology to a scale of values, and these values are the ones who will ensure the well-being and of the individuals and societies, and also to make sure that the human rights and the fundamental freedoms are respected. And since we have this multidisciplinary, multicultural and plural approach, plural meaning the different ethical views, of course cultural and disciplines, and we are also global because we have 194 countries, which is very important because we know that there are many initiatives trying to see how we can make sure that the use of these technologies are for the good and are really serving the best purposes, and the best purposes to everybody that will be affected by any decision that we take. So it's really, really the whole society. So UNESCO has been also entrusted at the UN level to advance this work in a coordinated group that was established at the EU as the Secretary General office, his executive office, to work on this. And also because we are the permanent secretariat of the UN Interagency Committee on Bioethics, which includes not only the UN agencies but also OECD, Council of Europe, the Commission, the European Commission, etc. That's why we got then, and of course this report was presented to the General Conference, and the General Conference, to the Executive Board, and the Executive Board of UNESCO, one of the normative bodies, decided that it was pertinent to establish a standard-setting instrument on the ethics of neurotechnology in the form of a recommendation. A recommendation it's a document that has, and you will see it, values, principles, and concrete policy actions. What is the main points of the recommendation? First of all, it's approaching it from the ethical point of view. And what do we mean by that? By a systematic, because ethics is part of philosophy, so it is not about only opinions, there is a whole way of making reflections. It's a normative reflection, meaning we have to decide which way we want to go, based on an holistic, multicultural, multidisciplinary, pluralistic, and evolving framework of interdependent values and principles. Evolving framework because the technologies are evolving, so we have to keep this reflection accompanying this development. And then the other important thing is ethics is considered as a dynamic basis for normative evaluation with human rights, human dignity, well-being, and the prevention of harm of harm and freedom of research as a compass and foundation of this recommendation. It includes in its scope data about the structure activity, but also the function of the nervous system, including the brain, the cerebellum, the brainstem, spinal cord, and is referred to as neural data, even if this data is collected outside the medical context. And I think this is where I'm trying to also get you more into how we are approaching the issue. The recommendation, in fact, encompasses, similarly to neural data, strictly speaking, the ethical and human rights implication of biometric data, that it is collected by several sensor technologies that indirectly can inform about neural activity. And in this case, they are referred to as non-neural data allowing cognitive states inferences. And we do it because they raise the same ethical and human rights implication. Without mixing the definitions. So it recognizes neural data and non-neural data allowing cognitive states inferences as sensitive data, even if they are collected outside the medical context. And this is because this data can also be used to infer mental states and thus challenging again the right of privacy. And why am I doing all the time this emphasis? Because we know that within the medical sphere, there are a lot of regulations. There's still a lot to do, particularly because of the interactions with other technologies. But outside the medical domain, there is a lot of, we really lack regulation, governance, and vigilance about the quality and how of the technology, and also about who is managing the data, what the data is being used for, etc. So the recommendation considers neurotechnology in its whole life cycle, from the early stages of mining and obtaining raw material for raw material for the tools like computer, etc., research, prototyping, design and development, to deployment and use, and including maintenance, operation, trade, financing, monitoring and evaluation, validation, end of use, disassembly, termination, disposal, and recycling, because we really want to cover everything. We want to be very inclusive in each of these phases of the life cycle, and it has to call also for responsibility and specific duties to all the ones who are participating in any of these stages of the whole life cycle, which includes also the convergence with other technologies such as artificial intelligence and, as I just said, the diversity of actors who are involved in each and every stage. All these choices with regard to the scope and definition, we consider that it makes this recommendation one of the most comprehensive instruments that will try to cover all the aspects of neurotechnology, because we know that there are also other existing instruments, but they are more in the health, again, in the health realm. The draft recommendation articulates a number of values and principles that are relevant in this context of the ethics of neurotechnology, and provides a list of policy actions and concrete recommendations addressing not only, as I said, the medical and research, but also other domains, particularly education, labor and employment, and everything that is direct to consumer or commercial domains. Some of the examples that we just saw, very interesting about the stress. The draft recommendation refers to specific end users also that merit special attention with regard to neurotechnology research or applications, or at least that they deserve specific consideration. Like, as I said also before, the children and adolescents, but also older people, persons with disabilities or mental health conditions, which we considered as different groups, disabilities and mental health conditions. And since gender is one of the global priority of UNESCO, it also dedicates a specific standalone policy action for gender equality. Here I'm sharing with you very quickly the values and the principles. The values, of course, are the ones who are the kind of the foundations of the reflection, the ethical reflection. Then they have to be developed into principles, and then these principles into concrete policy actions. So the values are respect, of course, at the very beginning are the human rights and fundamental freedoms and human dignity, the human health and well-being, because of course these technologies are offering so many promises that this is a must, an ethical must, to make sure that they are explored and used for this purpose, ensuring and respecting diversity and fairness, which is at the heart of our work, considering cross-cultural perspective on human knowledge and its sharing, global solidarity and international cooperation, and we have seen that this is really the key. We saw also with health outbreaks, but we know that also to advance knowledge and ensure that everybody has the right to access the benefits, environmental sustainability, and that's why part of the whole life cycle that I just described is also considering what happens when we are going to stop using this technology. What are we going to use to be doing not only to the person, but also to the environment where we are going to stop using the devices. And of course, since we're dealing with very specific and very delicate kind of research, integrity and responsibility are key. And the principles will be benefit, proportionality, and do not harm. Proportionality is really clearly also linked to ethical questions such as, do we need these technologies? Why? Who? For what reason? Who is deciding what are the benefits or the harms? Is there any other way to achieve what we want? Autonomy and freedom of thought is key. Protection of neural and non-neural data, allowing this, as I just said before, protection of this non-neural data that allows cognitive states inferences for mental privacy, non-discrimination, inclusivity, accountability, trustworthiness and transparency, epistemic justice. We want really everyone to be able to be able to contribute to the knowledge production, inclusive and engagement of public empowerment. I think civil society and everybody that is going to use this has to be really knowledgeable and really aware of the use of these technologies and the implications, best interest of the child, protection of future generations, and of course global justice and the benefits, the access of benefits of the process of the scientific program. These are the areas of policy actions: the governmental investment, use and regulation, data policy, cybersecurity, communication, engagement and information, gender equality, health and research, and some specific, as I said before, outside health, it will be education, labor, consumer and commercial domains, the consideration for specific users, and as I said, so far I haven't referred to it, but of course there is a reference to enhancement, and most importantly, there is a full program of implementation that will include some specific tools to, for example, see how member states are ready to use these technologies and what is the impact. And the last part, and this is my last slide, this is a long process of long no, because in the past we used to take 4 years to develop this kind of instruments. Now we are developing in 2. So the first part started in April 2024 when 24 independent experts, different from the International Bioethics Committee. That's why it's an ad hoc meeting. It's an ad hoc group because they only met to prepare the first draft of the recommendation. They come from all parts of the world. There is a balance in gender and disciplines. All the relevant disciplines have and backgrounds should be there. They prepare a first draft that then is submitted to a very inclusive process, because we want to have comments, again, not from governments, but from all the different stakeholders. And we had regional, sub-regional, national, and global online consultations. And as you can see, we had the result. We had more than 7K comments on the online consultation, and during all these regional and national and different levels of consultations, we covered 108 countries, and the range of the people who responded was quite varied. Then they have to meet again. They met again in August, and after, of course, a professional processing of this data, it was shared with the committee, who included all the comments that came from this consultation, and then a revised text was a result. And that's the end of the non-governmental part of how we develop these instruments. And then this document was sent to the member states, who sent the comments back. Now it's really the governmental phase in which we are now. The comments from member states were received until at the end of last year. And now the Secretariat has integrated meaning us, have integrated the comments into the text, now coming only from member states. And during the week of the 12th and 16th of May, we will have a meeting here in Paris where all the governments of the countries will come and will negotiate the text that we hope that will be, and that the results of these discussions will be then presented at the General Conference in October, November of this year, hopefully to be adopted, the text. Thank you very much. Here you have some quotes if you want to get access to the publications, and if you need any more information and you want to have any question or look at the website to look for more information. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Daphne, for your presentation and the important work that's being done at UNESCO. Is there somebody who wants to ask a question because of the hybrid situation? No. Yes, Michael, and try to keep it short, both the question and the answer. Yeah.
Dear Daphne, thank you for your presentation. I was a bit surprised to see the definition of signals of the central nervous system that should be protected or should be treated in a special way. I understand that part, but then the indirect way how to get information about the brain state, this definition, as far as I saw it now on your slides or explained by you, they would cover any kind of behavior. Like if I move my left hand and I touch a button, or I use an app, or I just use my bicycle or anything, this is a reflection of my brain state already. So should all of these indeed fall under the new ethics guidelines?
Mm-hmm. No, thank you very much for the question. It was definitely one of the big debates that we have during the expert group and also the consultation. And no, the answer is no. We just want to know not influence, but inferences. And only with very specific technologies and that are more detailed in the text. But no, because you're right. Also, also something that could affect. It could be psychotherapy, it could be anything, or even the exchange. So it's really in using some technologies and some sensors and some information that if we link it to other one through, for example, AI, and then we can make these inferences of the mental states. And this is or cognitive states, and only those would be covered.
Okay, thank you very much. So now we will have a short break, and then we have our panel discussion. Roshan Coles will take the lead there, also one of the organizers of this meeting.
Yeah, it's working. Okay, so we're ready with well, not the final session, because after this one, we of course have the lab tours. So just when we wrap up in about 3/4 of an hour after this panel discussion, it would be great, Andra, if you could invite the lab tour. Okay, good. Maybe so we can get exactly. So I'm Roshan Coles. I'm one of the researchers here at the Donders Center for Cognitive Neuroimaging. And I'd like to lead this panel discussion with, we have here on the right Marcel van Gerven, professor at the social faculty here, leading lots of the AI research on campus. Interested in natural computing, artificial computing. We have Stan van Pelt, who's a journalist and has just written a book on hack your brain. Am I right? Yeah, hack je hersenen. You can buy it from him. Welcome. And then we have Dennis van Kampen, senior beleidsmedewerker van. Oh, I've just turned to Dutch. Of our ministry. In Dutch, I don't really know in English. Binnenlandse Internal Affairs? Interior Affairs, Binnenlandse Zaken, for the Dutch. And then we have Rosanne Edelenbos, who's here from Rathenau and helped coordinate it. The report that Luc presented in the beginning of this session. Now, I'd like to revisit 5 of the topics we've talked about today already. 5 issues. Let me summarize them first. I'd like this to be interactive. Some of you might have submitted questions through the Mentimeter, but if you think this is the right moment to ask it, just put up your hand, and I'll look around, and Richard will also track the Mentimeter. I'd like to visit 5 questions, 5 issues. First, what exactly can we read out from the brain? Second, what exactly can we do to change the brain? Third, what are the opportunities? We've heard a lot about this, but there's still many questions, and I'd love to talk with you all about that. Fourth, what are the risks? And fifth, how can we regulate the use and development of neurotechnologies without limiting research and development unnecessarily? So let's start with the first question. Can we read out? What can we read out exactly from the brain? I think, Marcel, maybe that's a question for you. And in particular, is it really true that we can or cannot read out streams of thought, contents of thought?
All right, so I can say a little bit about the current state of affairs. We're also working on these techniques to decode brain states. One of the things we have shown, I think it's on. Yeah. So one of the things we have shown is we can actually reconstruct videos that are perceived by people in the MRI scanner. So that's something that is definitely doable. However, I would say that's also in externally induced events, right? It's sensory input which we can reconstruct. This is still quite different from reconstructing internal experience and stream of thought. The question is how far can we get, right? So there are some examples of decoding of imagery, internal speech, and especially in the combination with large language models and AI, I can imagine that we could go in this direction, but we are not there.
And what do you estimate is the time scale? I know these are impossible questions, but let's fantasize.
So I would say the impossible question is it's really hard to make the transition from perception to imagery. So the neural signals really have different characteristics. If we are able to bridge that gap, then I think this can go quite fast because of the, let's say, the capacities LLMs have, large language models.
As Rathenau Institute, so we are not neuroscientists. We invited different neuroscientists to come talk about this with us. And there were sort of different, so you said we can develop in this direction. So I'm interested in what does it mean, this direction, and how far can we go? And also, if you really talk, I think some people mentioned there's fundamental barriers to this stream of thought. Because it's in interaction with the environment, it's multi-layered, for example. Could you reflect a little bit on that?
Yeah, sure. So I'm referring to internal speech, and that also presupposes that you basically follow the instructions of generating internal speech. So you can still basically bypass the system, right? So the systems would expect you to fulfill or address the tasks you are given in order to be able to do so. So I don't think we are there, and we should not go there, I think, that we're able to infer any belief, desire, or intention you might have.
Yeah. Okay. I was interested by that statement, because I think the question is there a principled reason we cannot or can never some people say there's a principled reason why we should never be able to read out streams of thoughts because of the context dependency. Because, what we think is a function of how we move, of our environment and so on. But I didn't quite understand that, because imagine we get there, we get to that state of decoding what we imagine or what we think. Then that thought or that emotion, even though it's context sensitive, should also be represented in the brain. So I don't quite understand actually the principled objection or argument against that. But I wonder whether there's others in the room, or Marcel. Maybe.
I also don't understand the argument, so.
Yeah.
So I'm curious if,
Yeah,
maybe
doesn't that mean, or imply that you need to also to know the context before you're able to be able to decode all these signals? And if you don't have access to all this environmental information,
well, I guess it depends on what you want to reconstruct, right? So if it's really internal speech, I just need a lot of training data, basically, right?
It's true that what you think.
Context.
It's true that what you think, internal speech, will depend on the context, right? But then, given the context, you're thinking of something which you can then decode. So, in principle, the context dependency, I don't think is a principle to objection per se. Or
right, exactly. Yeah. So that's for me also a question.
Yeah.
So what does that mean exactly, and for what you measure, and also the argument is reductionist. You cannot. It's. I understand it's always sort of an interpretation of something, but to what extent is it reductionist or not? I think it's an interesting question. Yeah.
So Luc, remember, above Pim, maybe.
Sure.
I wonder if this is, loaded by now. And the idea is that we can throw this. Yeah?
You're so enthusiastic.
No.
It's getting worse now. This is good. I will just shout. So you need to tap it a little bit. I need to tap it a little bit. Bad microphone. Oh.
That's fine.
Technology. Why are we using it? Okay, so one of the things that I don't quite get is, okay, if we talk scientifically, then these are interesting questions. If you're talking societally, about the potential abuse of this technology, then the question becomes a different one. It's not whether we can completely decode trains of thought from pure brain activity. It's whether we get enough information from the brain that, correlated with other kinds of information, which we're always doing anyway, we get enough information to know and manipulate people. So the scientific question, interesting scientifically, is not a societally relevant question. It's not about pure decoding. It's about what does the brain signal add, and now already that question is being raised.
Yeah, so we already had a brief discussion about this. So of course this is not the first technology to read out something about internal states, right? I mean, if you think about lie detectors or measuring pupil dilation, but indeed being able to decode directly from neural signals provides yet another way to actually infer what people's intents are. Well, the question is what we can do on top of current technology and how we should regulate that. I think that's the important question. Yeah.
And Pim, just to respond to that, also when you say it's not the societally relevant question, I can see that if we can derive signals and intervene, that's a more, maybe more pressing societal question. But I think many people are worried that if others can, you know, somehow find out what I'm thinking, then that's also societally, that makes it societally relevant, right?
But that's
yeah.
The same way that we sometimes talk about artificial intelligence as a kind of super intelligence that will dominate the world and keep us as pets versus the kind of societal damage that we're now doing to ourselves via AI.
Yeah,
so
it's unrealistic.
These big fears, these science fiction fears, are used not to have the conversation about the real issues that we need to regulate. And then we start doing regulation, focusing on the wrong kind of topics, and it's our role as scientists to modify that and steer that in the appropriate directions.
Yeah. I would say that this regulation should also be based on rational grounds, right? So we cannot regulate, well, we can regulate everything, but I would also say that that's an unethical thing to do. So I would also like to raise the point that not using AI, for instance, in these neurotechnologies might be an unethical thing to do. And, well, you might be surprised by this and think, well, AI is scary, using this in neurotech. But at the same time, AI is also a technology which allows us to optimally drive brain states. So if you think about adaptive DBS, for instance, which we have looked at, there are already solutions in AI for over 70 years in control theory that actually allow us to optimally control complex systems. So if we want to build effective DBS systems, I would say it's not only the hardware, it's also the software which can really bring us one step further. And if we don't apply this, that's also a way of being unethical. But I'm also trying to raise the discussion here.
Yeah, no, that's great. I don't
There's
know
a trade-off, I guess, right?
Of course, of course.
Yeah. Like how much investment does that cost? How much more expensive will a device get, as someone was just mentioning, and how much does it add for in the end for the end user, a patient or someone else?
Yeah, I think so. But that being said, I think if we look at the hardware, the algorithms are not that costly. Of course, it becomes costly if we have to run this on large servers in the cloud, where high-tech maybe has access to the neural data we collect. That's not the way to go. But I think having small edge solutions that kind of supplement the current hardware really provides us with better technology and more cost effective.
So maybe this is a nice transition to the next issue on my list, which was what exactly can we do to change the brain? We've seen beautiful talks today, but so I made this point, we can't actually control the mind, at least not with ultrasonic modulation. We can only bias motor and mental programs that are already there. And I wanted to raise this question and see what you think, maybe Stan, but you know, anyone else who has a thought. What is the difference between controlling the mind and biasing existing already initiated programs? I think it is a really interesting question, which is why I wanted to highlight it. I don't know if you
Pretty
or anyone.
philosophical question. a pretty philosophical question as well, right? How do you define then, yeah, intervening or adding something? Yeah, I find it difficult. With these, what I always often encounter with this topic is that there is a lot of scientific research, but the gap with actual real world applications is still so big. So everyone is talking about it, but how does it the improvement that it currently has to people's lives? I'm not really, don't seem to be there yet. I mean, it seems more like a topic that's nice to philosophize about, and that then actually is there tomorrow, and we should regulate that today.
So Dennis, I see you.
Yeah, can I add something to that? Yeah, so I think it's a very relevant question, and what you're saying, Stan, as well, is I think it's sorry, yeah. I think it's a very relevant question. Also, what Stan was, what you were asking, and also what Stan is saying is a very relevant answer. But I think we should also look beyond whether influencing is already able as well. But I think claiming that something can be influenced by neurotechnology or like a consumer-graded neurotechnology can have very real consequences already. So, for example, thinking that you have a technology or a product that helps you sleeping can make you very aware of your sleeping patterns, and actually, without actually having an effect on it, can make you still very aware of these consequences, thereby actually affecting your sleeping pattern. So I think thinking that it can have an influence also can create disinformation, and I think we should be aware of those kind of things as well.
Yeah, Michael.
I would like to embrace a third way how the interaction of the brain could possibly happen. This is basically what Florian has posed. So instead of just like modulating or even controlling brain activity by directly interacting with the tissue, let's say, I mean, reinforcement learning that happens by providing informative feedback is also a very important way how we interact with our brains on that basis every day. So, but this way you can really provide treatments for patients ranging from stroke rehabilitation, for which we use brain-computer interfaces to provide information about how the brain is doing a task in that moment, and how a patient could possibly better use whatever is remaining of a certain network, let's say the language network, up to the level that maybe PTSD or other deficits or problems can be approached. So there's this more indirect. So you just offer information to the patient and hope that by this reinforcement learning that happens in the patient, you induce a change. It's still one step more indirect maybe than modulation, I think.
Yeah, when speaking of medical issues, I think this is another topic, but when focusing on opening new technologies for the public, I think in the future it will be also become like a nudging, like social media has become a nudging tool. Actually, social media is not controlling our emotions, our way of thinking, but rather it is nudging us, biasing us towards certain actions that then create loops and kind of new ways people relate to each other and think about each other. And we have seen how concerning those issues are actually also in politics, and also how it relates to society. So when those technologies at some point are so good and so unique that they are able to become public to the general market, I think they have immense consequences only through already biasing our decision-making or our ideas of how we view the world. I think this is already controlling without controlling. Yeah.
I think you're making a really good point. So maybe an example of how we think that in the context of focused ultrasound, how it could help patients, for instance, is I've introduced it as maybe a future clinical tool. I honestly don't think that focused ultrasound will replace any existing therapies, so I think it will enhance them. for instance, let's say that someone with anxiety disorder goes to a therapist. If that person just goes to a therapist and we stimulate their amygdala, I don't think anything will happen. So they should be stimulated, the amygdala, while they're having, for instance, like cognitive therapy with a therapist. They're talking about something because then something is going on. And only at that moment can you bias or introduce something or help the brain learn again a little bit better. So I do recognize what you're saying, so that's in a sense also controlling, because maybe without focus ultrasound the effects would not be there. But I do think in the context of a clinical setting, the agency part of the person, the patient, still chooses to do it. It's a different discussion if it comes to the markets and you can just buy it on, I don't know, bol.com or something, and everyone
you can already buy
ultrasound.
Yeah, well,
yeah, you can electrical stimulation techniques. You can already buy it on bol.com, and I think that's something to maybe consider and think about and inform the public, because we're always hyping these things up. But I honestly wish that it would work that easy, but I am suffering in the lab to see effects. It's just not, like they're very small, they're very subtle, and we should be very honest about it to the public. Like it's not going to change the world, right? Like it's in combination with other stuff. Yeah.
So I do have a question about the control aspect. So you mentioned it's not possible. At the same time, if we look back like 70 years into the past, we have Wilder Benfield, who using electrical stimulation can definitely control the brain. So what's the difference there? How do you see that?
Yeah, so the difference there, that's a really valid question to ask. The difference there is, to put it in terms of biology, with the intensities that we use for ultrasound stimulation, we cannot generate an action potential.
Right.
So that is different than TMS, for instance. I think you can generate action potentials if you stimulate the motor cortex, their hand twitches, it moves. With ultrasound, the intensities are way too low to generate any action potential, so we can only change the capacitance of the membrane, for instance. There's already something going on. We can help it move faster or slower.
Unless I'm a malevolent neurotechnologist who cranks up the intensity, right?
If you crank up the intensity, then we might have safety issues. Sure. Yeah. So there. Oh, can I continue? Oh, okay. You can crank up the intensity, but then we're moving into the field of high intensity focused ultrasound, and you might be ablating the brain because the heating will damage the neurons. So there's a limit where you can go and where we should, as neuromodulators, stay within. And the mechanical impact that it can have is only like changing capacitance of the brain and not strong enough to generate an action potential. Yeah.
So I'm doing a PhD, but in transcranial electrical stimulation. And I think sometimes we think like non-scientific people do not use this, but if you go to Reddit, you can find, for example, this group of around, I think it's 120,000 people, in which they buy TES and they use it at home because they have depression or PTSD, different kind of problems or diseases, and they just buy it and use it at home. And they just read these papers, and sometimes they even use the same protocols that these papers used, and they think they are getting like a treatment. And I think it's because also how we explain it in science, sometimes we hyped the results. And sometimes also we keep this science just to us, but people are reading this and they are using it already. Also, if we think this is just going to happen in the future, this is already happening. These non-scientific people are there using all these, all these techniques already. So I think it's something that we already need to take into consideration for also the laws that we are planning to apply.
I think there's a very big responsibility there for scientists who do know what the limitations are of these techniques, to avoid that, or to play down this big hype that technologies like these could have. And people may think, oh, I'm an early adopter. I'm going to buy these TES myself. I'm going to play around with it, and then run into all kinds of problems. Or even worse, you were mentioning the lie detectors. Well, for decades, people thought, or government thought, oh, these are kind of reliable, whereas they're not. If you would now, if you have, say, the American government thinking, hey, I can detect with brain signals sexual preference of someone who's entering the country here, which is technologically not possible yet, but they may think, well, we think we can do it, and this indicator gives like a rating, and based on that we decide if people can enter the country or not. That's something you want to avoid already, and that's, I think, where scientists like you guys play a big role, or could play even a bigger role than what's currently you're currently
but also
doing.
Journalists like you, right? So.
Yeah, but that's I think also a big responsibility of journalists to explain all the limitations. But it's really difficult to make a good distinction between the actual science and the hype and the promises that's also often in the scientific papers and in the press releases and in the talks by some scientists. We have to sometimes play down what scientists are claiming.
I would like to add another factor to why we face these problems. In the field of BCI, brain-computer interfaces, since about 2000 or so, like really thousands of articles have been published that show that we can read out to a certain extent the brain state, and also there are a lot of, like hundreds of ideas how this could be put to use, to good use, to medical use, in certain treatment ideas. Out of these, less than one handful of applications have made it to the market. Why is this? So even companies that have like 30, 50 employees, spin-offs of universities that try to establish a new neurotech product on the market, really have trouble to get it CE certified for patient use. Many of these companies die on the way to doing that. So the alternative that is taken by a lot of companies is to tackle the consumer market instead of the medical market. And they still tackle the same patients, hoping that they can make it as cheap such that the patients can pay it out of their own pocket. And there certainly we are. The devices are available. They actually are for medical treatment, but are not labeled as such. And at that moment, I think we lose control over how they are used, who uses them, and things like that, which would not be the case if the threshold to get it as a medical product certified would not be as high as it is at the moment.
So paradoxically, let me try and translate what you're saying. Currently, in policy, a clear distinction is made between medical and non-medical use, but that has a paradoxical effect, with the medical use being very regulated, in a sense, much more strongly regulated than the non-medical use, whereas it should be the other way around, in some sense, for development. Is that not what you're saying?
I don't think.
Because that's my next question, I guess, is like, what should we do then to, anticipate promises that are there? Otherwise, we wouldn't be in this field, or, as scientists, to avoid the, the limitations imposed by these regulations that are not fit for purpose.
We have to adapt these regulations.
How?
Reduce them and focus them on application scenarios where they make sense, and reduce the thresholds on application scenarios where they are at the moment just really blocking and hindering to make medical progress. I think the way how we protect personal data at the moment is always, it needs to be seen as a trade-off, right? So we see that by not being allowed to use personal data in many situations, this really costs lives, because we cannot, collect data into larger collections and for example, provide medical solutions based on AI, for example, that really would make sense and improve treatment. but they're in place for good reason. So, but I think it was overdone a bit, and we have to maybe, yeah, change it a bit.
So are we involved enough in order to kind of define the regulations? So are we really part of the process as scientists to really make sure things are heading the right way? That's the question, I think. I'm looking at.
Asking me, I think what we want to do is make science. This is what we're interested in, and we don't want to sit at the gremium and participate at the UNESCO decisions, right? So this sounds less appealing maybe for us.
Yeah, but we are the only experts, right? Yeah.
I think you raise an interesting question, because I think there's two sides. One way is that the medical device regulation is maybe too strongly regulated in your opinion, but then on the other hand is that if they enter the market, there's no intended use, so you can use it for whatever you want, and then of course there's a risk. So I think you claim for a balance between those two, I would say, rather than just deregulating the medical device regulation, because then for the public domain you still have an issue. So,
yeah, you may want to make the bar higher for consumer products
yes.
in like these.
Not only, please.
Can I also add to this?
Please.
Yeah, because I think to sort of complicate the matter further is also what Luc mentioned, I think, in why are we looking at neurotechnology now, is also because these big companies are becoming interested in neurodata and are signing for patents to collect EEG data, and it's for them a source of data among a lot of other types of data as well, and they have, yeah, therefore, we were talking about the extent to which you can sort of control. So I think, yeah, together this data can provide a lot of, yeah, ways to sort of hyper-personalize people's online environment and to inform decision-making, etc. So there's also, I think, a point about these, yeah, larger and also larger companies that are able actually to develop these medical devices that like, yeah, Elon Musk is doing right now, and are actually not really controlled in that way, because they sort of, yeah, they can they have their own rules, so they don't have to write peer-reviewed papers, for example. So I think that's also very interesting, and that's, I agree, Pim. There's two different layers, or short-term and longer-term things that are already happening now in the way that we can be controlled, and also longer-term, which relate more to neural rights and sort of questions about autonomy, which I think we should discuss as society. So what should technology contribute to and what not? And then we should regulate, so not starting from the technology and sort of fencing off all these, yeah, areas of the technology, but more from, yeah, values, you can say, societal values that are important. Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to say I can totally see the concerns that Michael is voicing, right? And I've seen them as well when I talk with companies in neurotechnology, or I do the neuroethics, but the thing is, we cannot as scientists continue in this debate by simply saying, look, we want deregulation. We should be, and this maybe is something for the Donders to think about as a policy, be more actively involved in providing the right kind of regulations that are context-based. One of the things that disturbed me a little bit about the UNESCO contribution today was that it was high-level philosophy, that you start thinking like, how are we going to make this practical? We have too much of that. What we need is very context-specific, application-specific, maybe patient or user group-specific types of regulation, and we are the ones that can make it. And good regulation is not just building dikes, it's also creating space. So if we don't, we cannot, I think it's not possible anymore in this time frame to say, look, I want to be a scientist, I need good regulations, give them to me. We're not going to get them. We have to make them ourselves. So we have to be actively involved in providing ourselves with regulations that give us the space to do the right kind of stuff. No one else is going to do it for us. This is a message that I think really has to sink in a little bit more than it has been doing so far.
Could you give an example of what such a regulation could look like?
Well, for instance, that you say, okay, we have now with the medical device regulation a certain period of time, let's say 2 years for startups. where we say a certain amount of paperwork, you know, gets off the table. We create sandboxes, you know, free zones, the same as happened with robotics in Korea, etc., where we say, okay, here you have the time to play within, you know, clinical conditions, certain explorations that give us space. There are still some regulations, obviously, but they're going to be really functional in the sense that they're just avoiding the big mess. And they're not protecting against bad intent. We assume that within a clinical or in a scientific academic milieu are less, well, not always, but less often occurring. So that would be something. And the issue really is that we need to specify what those domains then would be, which would be, for the next 2 years, what are the domains where we think that you can have a breakthrough with a startup, etc. If we don't formulate it, who will? We need a fifth theme.
Thanks for making that case, Richard. So I was going to ask you, Richard, because the questions are coming in from the audience. I don't know if you've been tracking them.
Well, people can also read them on the screen, and a lot of them have been addressed, I think. So, but please raise your hand if your question is not. One is the European component, I think. So, because if we talk about regulations and about the Donders needs to do that, but it will mean then that the Donders needs to go to Brussels. That's the only way to do this, I think. But it's also a question, I think, for Dennis. So how that should be. Now we have, of course, so we are coordinating Neurotech.eu. That's a network of large universities and all over Europe working on neurotechnology. So that's also we can also do it via that gremium. So we should use all the our connections with the ministries and also the connections with our European partners working on neurotechnology, I would say. So and be more focused on that as a if I now talk to the Donders Institute or as a Donders Institute also open our view to Europe and not. Well, especially in this time of age, things are changing anyway. But if we talk about regulations, I think it's Europe that is the target. Yeah. And for other questions, maybe if people have a question that was on the list that was not asked.
Here, so I haven't.
Hi, I work for Neurotech.eu, and we are building a master's together with all these different universities. And I thought the debate was incredibly interesting, and my question really is, what is the implication for education? Because scientists aren't born in a vacuum. You know, they come from the academy and they go out of the academy. So there's also a role, certainly, for teaching and how we approach that in tackling these questions, right?
I think that's a very interesting question. Let's see if any of our panel members have ideas about that. What's the implication for education, or Richard or some of the audience?
You mean education in general, in like high schools, or academic education in neuroscience?
I was thinking academic in this context, but of course there's multiple layers of it, but pick or choose.
Yeah, so, well, at the university, so there are already several masters at here, at the Radboud, also in the Netherlands. There, this component of regulations, for instance, or these kind of things, are often not so much taught, or there's not a lot of attention to that. This, the European master that we are developing, it's really a big component in that program. So talking with, so we have program with legal people from ethics. Ethics is often addressed in a lot of, but. If you really want to get neurotechnology to be really used in society, then these regulatory affairs are also very important. So I think that could be more discussions about that, more teaching, that could certainly help. Yeah.
Could I ask a question?
We have the Master AI.
Yeah.
Is a track that is 2 years for master students on the societal impact of AI and cognitive neuroscience. It's been in effect for 3 years now.
Yeah.
Could this question also be asked to the students themselves that presented this, their research today, and how they feel about this?
Well, I think it should be more of a balance. Like as Pim was saying, it's now you want that researchers really make the legislations or do a proposal for how to implement that. But then I think that research, that their scientific field is also very conservative in a way that it doesn't really ask other people about how they think about it. So that's the thing I think you should take more into consideration and not only say, okay, yeah, research should do a proposal about that. So that's my opinion on that.
Advice instead of maintaining yourself. That's good enough.
Yeah. So take, for example, the creative field, so more like artists and stuff. I mean, a lot of people think they will not come with nice ideas about how to go on with technology, but I think they often do really have a broad perspective of how to implement stuff like this. So yeah.
So we've reached the 5 o'clock mark. That went really fast, right? What I want to do is wrap up. Maybe just one more look at whether there's a sort of a final question or a remark from. I think so. You deserve it. Great talk. Do you want to do that? A final point, and then I'll go thank everyone.
Maybe, I'm so sorry, it's a final question maybe, because it was triggered by something that you said, Stan, and also triggered by the presentation by Saman. And because I often struggle also as a researcher, because I'm very proud of the method that I'm using, and when lay people, my friends not in academia, ask me about it, I would just want to, you know, be proud and explain what I'm doing. But at the same time, I always struggle, like, where is the balance in being honest and just being proud about it? Because, for instance, one of my principal investigators is being invited for lots of interviews to talk about focused ultrasound, and in these interviews it's like we can treat cancer, we can, you know, like heal the brain, save the world. I get that it's something that needs to be said, but then in the same time we're also giving a lot of people false hope. We get emails, like I get emails from patients that have, you know, a medical issue, like, hey, I've read this, I've heard this, is it possible to treat my condition with it? And it's a really, like, I'm not trained to properly respond to that, and I'm just like wondering, where's the fine line? How can we be proud of what we're doing, but also be very informative about it? And I know that researchers, you know, want to say that their method is going to save the world because it brings in grant money, and it makes sense. But where does it start?
I think you can do both. It's not either or in this case, but yeah, you definitely need to keep in mind who you're talking to. If you're indeed writing a grant, yeah, well, make it as shiny as possible. But if you're talking to people in the real world who may indeed think, hey, this may cure my disease or my aunt's disease, be very well careful and make clear all the caveats, all the things that need to be solved before this can be actually put into clinical practice. And if you're talking to media, yeah, well, a proper journalist will ask you the right questions. In other words, there's media training for this also sometimes helps. So if you think, hey, I'm encountering this over and over again, I don't know how to deal with this, go to the communications or contact the communications officers here, and they should be able to give you tips and tricks.
And I think to circle back, I think it's really good that you're reflexive on this, and to circle back to the education, that could be part of education as well, to promote this reflexivity, because you can be both proud and nuanced. And nuanced, I think, and that is the debate that we need to that we're having here.
And it's the nuanced contribution that we have to make also in Brussels. So I want to wrap up, and before I'm gonna give the mic to Andra, I want to thank Andra, because she's done a lot of work for this. Wonderful job. I think it was all very well organized. Great program. We're not done yet. And of course, I want to thank all the speakers that we've had today. I think yeah, actually we had 2 wonderful online contributions, real that's difficult to have added value from remote. I think we had that. Luc started us off with a beautiful overview of the report, a beautiful talk. And then Soha, oh, you want to do this? And yeah, you go and do that. Yeah, so I've already mentioned Luc, so you can merci him. And then we have Soha, also great talk. Salmon, are you still there? Or well, he's going to get Salmon. And Florian, I guess, also left. And then, of course, our panel speakers, thanks so much for coming and joining. We had a much broader discussion, I think, involving the whole audience, which was great. But you came especially for this, so thanks for that very much.
Thank you.
And of course, the students, I want to thank you for your, your contributions, helping organizing, also the research you've done. Hopefully, you're going to continue to contribute to the initiative, and of course, Richard. Thanks very much. It's fun to work together on this. For now, we have a couple of lab tours. I think it's exciting. So let's see. We have maybe André. I give you the floor. Yeah. Thanks, everyone.